People wanted to argue about whether or not this was a knife, Drew, or if it was a utility tool. All I could say to that was like, well, just explain to the Metcalf family that Austin was utility tooled to death and see if that really makes a difference for them. I understand that it kind of changes the way that you look at Karmelo if he's bringing some kind of tool with him. It changes it from some sort of violent premeditation at home the moment he decided to pick up the knife or pick up the tool. But when it came down to it, it doesn't substantively change anything because Austin was executed right there at the track match. He didn't get a trial. He doesn't get appeals. He doesn't get to argue. He doesn't get to quibble about what the weapon was. But so many people got caught up in whether or not this was a knife or a tool. Drew, what does that mean to you, if anything?
It means nothing. The end result is not going to change. If it was a piece of a rusty chain that had a sharp edge to it, the result would have been the same. He still chose this level of violence, whether it was a conscious decision or just something that his brain told him to do. You know what I mean? Like, not from a violent upbringing, but just something that he's seen on TV or seen in a video game or whatever. The weapon is just the vehicle. That Karmelo Anthony video is one of the most commented videos we've ever put out. So John and I sat down for a members live Q&A, and we went through your comments, the fair ones and the wild ones. Here's some of what we covered.
But before we jump into those comments, Drew, what's on your mind?
I'm glad that we got the bump that we got with the Karmelo Anthony case, because it kind of really, in a sense, it strives to be what we've kind of always wanted to be. Like, we're not here to take sides, though sometimes, like, in the natural way of us telling a story, you'll be able to tell which side we fall on. This was a particularly tragic case where nobody won. And the problem is, and you hit the nail on the head in the episode, that the media that thrives on the division and makes money off of it and all that, they're the only ones that won in this thing. And it was evidenced by the fact that, like, well, first of all, there were some very heartfelt comments that were like, finally, somebody just talked about the case. Let's not talk about the, and that we acknowledge that they were just like raging teenagers, like dumb kids.
Yeah.
All around.
This wasn't exactly the first shot fired in a helter-skelter style race war or something. That's what the media wanted it to be. They wanted it to be the thing that propelled the narrative throughout the summer months. They wanted to gin up enough and foment enough discord and rage that we would probably have long-lasting civil unrest throughout the summer. Nothing pumps up media ratings like that. They don't have the Olympics or anything going on this year. They tried to make as much as they could out of the World Cup. Total failure. Nobody cares about that. But they wanted Karmelo Anthony to be the thing that got them through summer months of not having much to go on. And unfortunately, the case just wasn't there. There wasn't enough there that was controversial enough. Of course, people still feel passionate about it no matter what. And you're always going to have a few outliers who feel like the case was unfair, or actually we're going to go ahead and just dive into those comments, Drew, because I don't want to speak on behalf of people when they were kind enough to leave a comment for us and speak for themselves. And I'm going to give you a good mix, Drew. I'm going to give you some fair questions, some good questions that were asked. And then just to ruin your night, just one or two comments that were bad. But I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you to everyone who left a kind comment. You will not be featured tonight. I'm sorry. As much as we appreciate you, there's not much controversy and just patting ourselves on the back all night long. We could do that without dragging everyone else into it. So, Drew, I'm going to go ahead and break into the comments here. Jeff Burns says it's difficult for a jury to see remorse when the defendant doesn't speak on his own behalf, neither during the trial nor during sentencing. Now, of course, he doesn't have to speak during the trial because everyone's got a Fifth Amendment right to protect themselves from incrimination on the stand. But do you think it would have made a difference, Drew, if he had made a comment during sentencing? We have seen people very eloquently take the stand. People like Sarah Boone, who are able to melt the frostiest of judges' hearts and get some of that last-minute clemency. Do you think it would have helped him at all? Do you think it would have helped people to see his side of it? Or at that point, had his parents thrown in the towel and they just figured, hey, we could get to lunch faster if Karmelo doesn't take the stand?
I think his parents probably have a lot of blame to shoulder in this, but it's probably like, look, they've never been through this either. And there are opportunists who are trying to, or who probably swooped in at some point, whether they're still in their orbit or not. But there are probably opportunists that swooped in and gave them very, very bad advice. And, perhaps I think it would have humanized Karmelo, to be honest. Like if it were like, look at our comments section for once. And this is the court of public opinion. It's not factual. It's not what happened in the walls of the courtroom. But people actually said, I never really looked at him in this light. I just looked at him as the guy who stabbed the other guy in the chest. And he was just being kind of a kid, who made an incredibly bad decision. And it's not to be dismissed. Like, people accused me in there of taking sides or making an angel out of this, young man. No, that's not the case at all. In fact, he stood trial and he was found guilty.
Did you notice there were some people who said we were taking it too easy on Karmelo, and some people said we were ridiculous and corrupt?
Harsh.
That's how you know. That's how you know that we struck the right balance, because 90% say this was fair and unbiased. I love this coverage. It was great, which warmed my heart. And then you still have the fringe lunatics on either side saying that we got it all wrong. But I think that his parents kind of left him hanging in the wind there. And I don't know, they could have always come up with a common sense compromise. Like Karmelo could have written a statement that could have been written into the record or something. But
John, do you agree, or don't you think, because I didn't answer like fully, but I think you put that kid on the stand, he's probably not going to get within the first 2 or 3 words, and he's going to be broken down, like completely broken up. And I think a lot of people would see him a little bit differently, at least. And then, of course, you're going to get the boo birds that are just like, oh, he's just crocodile tears because he knows he's going to prison. Do you think it would have humanized him if he were to make some kind of statement?
I think so, but I think it definitely would have. But do you think maybe the attorneys didn't want him to do that because they're part of some kind of profiteering on the rage cycle? Like the last thing they would want is everyone on their side, all the donors and all this, to kind of lose the steam for Karmelo's innocence. Because if he gets up there and says anything during the sentencing, it's essentially taking responsibility. It's admitting that he did it. All that's on the record. That deflates any energy for an appeal. And if there's any juice to get out of this case, meaning dollar signs, wouldn't that go all out the window if all of Karmelo's supporters saw him that contrite?
Yeah. It would deflate a lot of they definitely need to billow the angst in order to keep the conversation alive, so to speak. Like, this is a total, you titled this Our Favorite Cases. However, we left Karen Reed off of that. And as most of you know, Karen Reed is my favorite case for a few reasons. But this is a total Karen Reed moment. This is a defense that is just keeping the public narrative angry and upset and focusing on the wrong things. Whereas it's a little bit different because, they could hide behind a lot of stuff in the Karen Reed case that they couldn't hide behind in the Karmelo case. But they're just keeping people angry for the wrong reason and keeping the case being tried in the public court of public opinion.
And that's not what's in Karmelo's best interest, though. Like, I have to say that what was in Karmelo's best interest seems to have been hijacked by his parents. He was 17, so they were involved. And then I think people who wanted to profit off of it and make it a spectacle, they engineered it into something it wasn't supposed to be, and the media picked up right on that.
I really thought it was very shallow and very low-hanging fruit of the media and of social media to just call this, some black kid stabbed a white kid. Like, it's not that. It's so much more than that. It's just, it doesn't need to be any deeper than that. But how about this? It's one kid stabbed another kid. It's one kid that resorted to deadly violence when confronted. And there's arguments over, well, he put his hands on me, how that in black culture means that he roughed him up. And it still doesn't justify the deadly force. And and then even the pushing and the shoving and how he was jumped and all this other stuff. Look, there's legalities to all this, but it's not for Karmelo Anthony, the young black kid. It's Karmelo Anthony, the guy who plunged a knife into, Metcalf's chest, unfortunately. Like, that's where it should have been. That's where it should have stayed.
And it would have never gone into national media at all if they could not have made race an issue on that. I think that's fairly clear. This conversation would be fair if these two cats, that means you and me, spoke about Hunter and Austin's choice making as well. So what do you have to say about their choice making insofar as this is a legal show and we're talking about the law? And Karmelo Anthony's demeanor while he's on body camera.
This wasn't a show for that. It wasn't about the fairness of the fight. I don't want to talk about the fight. The fight is what is the tragedy in all this. The fight is what ended, young Metcalf's life, and it ended Karmelo's life essentially, right? Until whatever happens next. But so like, I'm not playing sides, and I'm not trying to play offense defense here. We're talking about a case that's very serious that needed to be heard in a court of law with facts and, devoid of, or you're never going to remove all emotion from a murder case like that. But yeah, okay, to be fair, yeah, there was I think people are unjustly blaming the twin for jumping in and making this a 2-on-1, and that's the reason he needed to pull a weapon. And look, there was a shoving match. And this is why we said from the jump, these kids are 17 years old, coursing with testosterone. They're with their own team, whether he was invited in that tent or not. He was asked to leave, and a shoving match ensued. It happens every day in the hallways at high schools and middle schools around America. Every day. But rarely does that shoving match, and especially when it's in the confines of the school where it's a little more dangerous, you're in the great wide open with these bleachers and tents and all this other stuff. Rarely does it escalate into a homicide. And I think that's the dangerous part of the story. Like, Karmelo's next thought was, I got that knife, I need to use it. That's what we should be talking about. I don't care if Karmelo is Martian. I don't care if Karmelo is a Slytherin or you know what I mean? Like, I don't care where he's from or what he's done. The fact of the matter is, he knew he had a knife in his backpack, and he got into a shoving match, and he chose to plunge it. And by all accounts, he was a good kid. So where does he get that notion from?
Well, again, prior bad acts in your character are all things that are going to come into some kind of play in the sentencing phase. Okay, but we didn't comment on the sentence for Karmelo Anthony. We didn't really get into that at all. So any prior bad acts by your victims, any prior bad acts by Karmelo, none of that's relevant. And although we feel that way, we feel like it's relevant, in a court of law, it's not relevant. And if an attorney brings up something that's out of bounds, it's going to be objected to for relevancy, and that line of questioning is going to be over with. All that stuff about character witnesses, all that stuff about prior bad acts, that comes in the second phase of the trial. Okay, it doesn't come in during the guilt or innocence phase. So that's just not something that we even wanted to address. But you mentioned the knife. This is a comment. I was up at one point till 4:30 in the morning dealing with this one, but people wanted to argue about whether or not this was a knife, Drew, or if it was a utility tool. All I could say to that was like, well, just explain to the Metcalf family that Austin was utility tooled to death, and see if that really makes a difference for them. I understand that it kind of changes the way that you look at Karmelo if he's bringing some kind of tool with him. It changes it from some sort of violent premeditation at home the moment he decided to pick up the knife or pick up the tool. But when it came down to it, it doesn't substantively change anything, because Austin was executed right there at the track match. He didn't get a trial. He doesn't get appeals. He doesn't get to argue. He doesn't get to quibble about what the weapon was. But so many people got caught up in whether or not this was a knife or a tool. Drew, what does that mean to you, if anything?
It means nothing. The end result is not going to change. If it was a piece of a rusty chain that had a sharp edge to it, the result would have been the same. He still chose this level of violence, whether it was a conscious decision or just something that his brain told him to do. You know what I mean? Like, not from a violent upbringing, but just something that he's seen on TV or seen in a video game or whatever. The weapon is just the vehicle. It really, I mean, I do, I still stand fast in what I said. Like, here in Hillsborough County, it's automatic expulsion. If you're caught with a knife in your backpack, you're expelled, not suspended. That's a different level. It's expulsion. So, and then you have to appeal to get back into school. He brought a knife to school. I realized it was just, on the campus. It was in the back. It was for the track meet. He had it for whatever reason, because that was
an official function. It's the same thing as the school grounds. That's
the same thing. Yeah. And the reason why is because kids that age are not fully formed yet. They don't have the willpower to not use that knife. That's the exact reason for the harsh penalties of bringing that's why bringing bananas and pointing it like a gun get kids expelled. Like even those ridiculous cases we hear all the time. That's exactly why that is, and so I don't think we were being unfair at all. I think that we looked at it objectively in McKinney. Jurors on Friday got their first glimpse of the pocket knife prosecutors say Karmelo Anthony used to fatally stab Austin Metcalf. Collin County Assistant District Attorney Bill Wersky pulled on black gloves to display the knife, a 3.5-inch black blade with a textured silver handle, small enough to fit in a palm and to legally carry on school grounds in Texas. There's a correction right there. I'm saying what happens in Hillsborough County, apparently in Texas, this is a legal knife to carry on school grounds. You're still not allowed to plunge it in people. That's illegal. The outcome of the case can hinge on how the jury views the weapon and whether they believe Anthony's decision to use it on the unarmed Metcalf was justified. Student athletes who saw the incident unfold testified that Anthony, now 19, had his hand in a backpack before the altercation. They said they thought he was bluffing and were shocked when he pulled out the knife. No one brings a knife to a track meet, a 16-year-old student athlete testified under question from Wersky. District Judge John Roach forbade media outlets from naming him or other minors called as witnesses. That right there is probably why it was not televised, because it was mainly kids. It was probably underage. It was the
witnesses, right? Yeah, they would have all had to have been blurred out and muted anyway. So I guess that answers the question here from Karen Marshall. Why was the actual knife not shown during the trial? I guess the answer is that it was. The next one is, at what time was he detained, interrogated? Was his rights ever read to him? Because he talked, does that mean they did not have to read him his rights? Well, as Drew is chastising his dog, I'll tell you that there's a couple things that have to come into play before you Mirandize someone. You have to take them into custody, and then you have to begin asking them questions. If you take someone into custody and do not ask them questions, they could say whatever they want to say. You're not going to shush them. If they start making comments that are inculpatory about what's going on with them legally, the smart thing to do is just let the body cam record all that. If you want to ask them questions about what's going on with them criminally, but they're not in custody, like what we saw when we were handling the Mariah Wilson case, if they're not in custody and that you're asking them questions, as long as they're free to get up and walk out that door, you also do not have to Mirandize them. You might want to make it clear that they're allowed to leave, that they're not in custody, so a lawyer later can't try to explain that they were confused about whether or not they were in custody, because that could be a bad problem. Police officer, when people were watching that body camera footage and they saw Karmelo saying things, at what point does he need to get Mirandized? Because of TV, people are always looking for that, and they're always quick to point it out, and they're always shocked to find out that it doesn't matter. Go ahead.
I don't have the current case law, so take this with a grain of salt, but I'm saying that's a downstream issue. That's a prosecutor issue, and it's rarely an issue, because the four things that need to be present, just like you described a second ago: custody, interrogation, they have to have a waiver, and they have to understand what they just waived. They're in no danger of being in custody when they're over the phone, because you can't get to them. And certainly you're asking them guilt-seeking questions, but not necessarily, because for the purpose of the safety of the officer, for the purpose of the safety of the other people on the scene, you're required to ask certain questions. And I do understand the question about, and let me say this as a blanket, Miranda is a tricky issue for cops, let alone citizens. I completely understand why it's like a little unclear of why, Karmelo wasn't read his rights or whatever. I get it. I understand it. I can explain it the best I can. Whether you choose to believe me or not is a different story. But so if the 911 caller is not in custody, ask away. You got to ask questions for several different reasons. For wound care, to make sure that whoever committed the crime isn't still there and laying in wait for the other officers to show up. I mean, there's a million reasons why you could be asking these questions, but it's all going to be case by case anyway. And if it gets down to a conversation where, like, well, why do you think you killed him? And the defense wants to suppress that, let them try. I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get suppressed. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to get brought into the to the trial. But as far as being an agent of law enforcement, being an agent of law enforcement means under the law enforcement officer's control. So no, probably in Wisconsin, no, you can't send an informant in somewhere and say, hey, go in there and ask him a bunch of questions and I'm going to record you. You're an agent of a law enforcement officer at that point. Even if I'm on the way, John, as a law enforcement officer, and I'm asking you over the radio, ask them where the knife is. You're not, that's expected. You're expected to ask that question. I'm expected to know before I walk in there. So
police have an expectation that they need to stop further acts of harm and violence. Yeah. If they don't ask where the knife is, if we don't work on securing the knife, then we're negligent in our response in preventing future harm. We have to know where that is. We're not even necessarily worried when we're responding like this. The first thing that we're responding to, like this, they taught us this in crime scene classes. Like, if you have to go into a crime scene to check to see if that victim's alive, go do it, because they could still be alive and you could save their life, and maybe you don't even have to end up prosecuting a murder. It's the same kind of logic, right?
Yeah.
You want to secure that knife to make sure that we don't have any other stabbings going on. And even if that complicates the legal process, the discovery, the suppression hearings later, that's what all those things are for anyway, all those pre-trial motions. And so we have a way of cleaning that up and making sure that it's fair. Do they not understand how appeals work? Do they think that the appeal just means they get a second at bat to explain why Karmelo had the right to do what he did? Because that's not what an appeal is. The bullying, even if they had introduced it in this trial, which they chose not to, it's still not a defense for what happened. It's situational. It's one-on-one confrontation, or if you listen to the other people, like it's even if it's 2-on-1 or 3-on-1, yes, the office or the number of people that you're being confronted by can be a factor in a deadly force situation, but there has to be an active attack. So my response to Dee and others who claimed that there was some sort of massive collusion amongst all the people in Frisco, which is I guess a community, a white neighborhood community, who all wanted to have this be just a big fake case against Karmelo. They all kind of conspired with the system. One hand watched the other. So everyone that dialed 911 and was screaming and crying that they had just witnessed a child stabbed, all of those people first all got together and said what they were going to say to the 911 operators, and then they all went back to where they were, and then they all dialed 911, because that's the main part about this show that we talk about in every episode, Drew, is how 911 call is your first source of investigative evidence. It's your first forensic thing that you're even gathering, is the testimony of eyewitnesses, excited utterances, live in real time, people calling and volunteering this information. And they're all saying more or less the same thing, was that Karmelo, this kid in a gray hoodie, they gave a perfect description of him. They said what he did. They said where the victim was. They said exactly what happened. If we're going to have lies on the stand, according to this person, how is it that we get around the corroboration that had to have occurred before 911 was dialed even one time? That there was a bigger conspiracy afoot, to the point where they actually implied that Austin would still be alive. It was the only conclusion that I could actually get from some of those comments. But there's a lot of big emotions here, Drew. I don't mean to get you all riled up, but 100 big racist bullies, and Hunter led to his brother's death. Should have left that boy alone. People are forgetting Karmelo Anthony is epileptic. He can't be beat on fighting, so he had to protect himself. Now, that just goes to show you guys that epileptics are another protected class. If you're neurologically stable and you don't have epilepsy, it is like Donkey Kong, just so you know. But he saved his own life 100%. I just wanted to say, people who watch the show know they're a Christian, but why am I seeing the meanest comments coming from Jesus' daughter, 4299? Yeah. You forget that you made a statement about who you are when you chose your username, and maybe you ought to live up to that. But Drew, any comments at all about Karmelo Anthony being an epileptic, and that being an extra reason why he would need to defend himself, that any confrontation is a potentially lethal confrontation?
That is never a defense for murder. It's never going to be. I think that was what I agreed upon with myself to use as the standard response to those comments. If your theory is that he's epileptic, therefore he can't hit his head, therefore he has some kind of waiver to just go straight to deadly force, you're fooling yourself. This is what the court would say is, okay, well, where was his hockey helmet? You don't get to just stab people just in case you hit your head. and you're epileptic and you may have a seizure. And I would love to see the source of some of these conversations. Is it Reddit? Is it TikTok? Is it, Facebook? Is it right here on YouTube? Like, it's ludicrous to think that people actually buy the fact that, well, he was epileptic, therefore he had to take care of business before business took care of him. It doesn't work that way. It never, ever, ever will work that way, ever.
Also, I'm not a doctor, but if you're just a regular person, if you get beat on too much, you could also die. So I don't really see why there would be any kind of enhancement for that. Stop, or we can roll on. But imagine causing your own demise. Wow. What a way to raise your kids. Some really hateful things. I could just tell you this quick anecdote. The exact way that you're phrasing this really troubles me. Imagine causing your own demise. The idea that a person can precipitate their own homicide is criminal thinking. I worked in a prison for 6 years, and while there was someone there who was doing life. And he once said to me out loud that the only reason he was in prison was because he knew someone that tried to get himself murdered. This is the self-justification of someone who is in prison for attempted murder. Okay, he implied that the person brought the criminal actions upon himself, that it was the victim's fault. This is victim blaming, which is totally uncool, but it's also a symptom of criminal thinking. Okay, so it's quite possible that if you believe that the Metcalfs were raised in a way that morally or legally or somehow justifiably got them to precipitate their own murder, you need to seek professional help. And this is not a joke. If you think that somehow the Metcalfs are not playing victim and they're somehow to blame for what happened to them, I don't mean to get all hot and bothered about it, but the idea that the Metcalfs somehow had this coming to them by their own behavior, there's no behavior that you could demonstrate as a 17-year-old or as an adult for that matter that justifies you getting stabbed, let alone at a school event. Drew, I'm gonna de-escalate myself and let you take over there.
We're on the exact same page about that, and I'm not trying to get you worked up even more. I think, first of all, the first thing that comes to mind when I see that comment is that applies to everybody. That applies to Karmelo as well. He created his own demise, and there's no two ways about it. He's sitting in prison for 35 years. He's begging for an appeal.
Yeah,
that's what you get.
Imagine causing the forfeiture of your freedom. Wow, what a way to raise a kid. Do you see how the shoe fits on the other foot as well?
Yeah, right. Now, as far as precipitating your own homicide, I dealt with that comment, not that specific one, but you'll see it in there. If you go in there and leave a comment of your own, there'll be 4 or 5 different people have that thought or that notion. And I said the exact same thing you did. That is a criminal first mindset. The fact that you think that it is okay for him to, quote, defend himself by just escalating straight to deadly force tells me that you're more inclined for criminal behavior than you are for opting for another solution. Nobody had look, they keep saying this, Karmelo had no duty to retreat. Okay, well, that means Austin had no duty to retreat either. It means he didn't have to go find an adult. It means that they both made bad decisions, and one of them is no longer with us because of it. So,
for everyone that wants to get on Austin's case, I just wanted to remind you, I've already said it before, but just say again, he didn't get a trial. He didn't get a crooked trial. He didn't even have the benefit of a sham trial. He didn't get to make his own statement. He wasn't offered the opportunity to have his say in a day of court. He didn't get to be judged by a room full of people who were his peers. He was summarily executed for bad behavior, if that's even what happened. What is it that he did that he deserved summary judgment right there on the spot? Suppose he put his hands on Karmelo Anthony. You're going to tell me that's an executable offense? That's a capital offense to anyone of any culture? That's ridiculous to say that. And yet we have a certain number of people in the population of comments. I shouldn't have been surprised, right? Because you look at the population of human beings in the United States, and a certain proportion of them, Drew, are going to commit a crime and go to prison. I guess I should have seen the same statistics were going to be in play in our own comment section, that the overwhelming majority, beautiful, nice, kind, fair, sweet people left us comments. And then just that small proportion of people out there, the feloniously inclined, they also left comments too, Drew. So I just won't stand for any victim blaming on this, because even if Austin Metcalf was the biggest asshole in the world, it's not illegal to be an asshole.
I got a little choked up though. I was proud of us, John. I got a little choked up at the people that were like, I never really looked at it this way. Or, I've seen this in a completely different light, or finally these guys are a breath of fresh air. And even some of the people who, still push the racist narrative that we're racist. However, you guys did okay on this one. It's still, at least meet me in the middle. Let's talk about the facts. Let's not talk about the white kid and the black kid. And my main comment that I relied on was this. We did a video about the content of Karmelo's character. You are telling us that we are incorrect and we should be looking at the color of his skin. Let that sink in for a moment. And I started using that more and more and more. And it's the truth. Like, we're talking about Karmelo's character and that he was compliant and that he was remorseful. And They are saying, you think that, you don't understand what put your hands on me means to a black person and all this other bull. I don't care what it means to anybody. Okay, it's two hot-headed 17-year-old testosterone-filled kids had a shoving match and one shoved a knife into the other. And that's it. And two families lost their children that day. One twin lost his twin brother and he'll never be the same again.
Right.
That's what I looked at. That's the Karmelo Anthony case, straight from your comments. If you haven't seen the original breakdown, the body cam, fight, arrest, that video is linked right here. And honestly, it's the one that made this entire conversation happen in the first place. And we're always interested in what you have to say. We have more cases moving through right now. If you want to see where things stand on some of our other ongoing coverage, check the link in the description. We'll keep updating as these cases move through the courts. Every good true crime story starts with a 911 call. We'll see you next time.
911 emergency, police or paramedics.
He's going westbound on foot. Westbound on foot. There we go.